Stop. I know what you're thinking, you're hyped and you're super horny and you don't really care about what the videos say, but it is important for us to remember that a hype character is not necessarily a strong character. Zhangli. And to be honest, so far, MiHoYo has been doing a pretty good job at balancing all the characters. They're pretty much all in line with one and another. I mean, you'll probably prove for Yae Miko anyway, but as always, we're gonna be addressing this video from a meta point of perspective. And welcome to the Yae Miko pre-release analysis, where I will try my best to be as objective as possible without any Sasuke stuff getting in the way. Anyway, let's get started. But if you're not subscribed already, don't forget to do so. Let's get started. To begin, Yae Miko is gonna be a electro sub DPS with two major weaknesses. Number one, her elemental burst costs way too much at a 90 cost. Number two, she takes way too much field time. But regardless, overall, I think Yae Miko is gonna be a fairly balanced character in terms of power level. Her value, on the other hand, is gonna be a little bit lower than an average, which I currently have it rated at 2.5 out of 5. It might be surprising a lot of people, but I'll explain it in a later. Keep in mind that power level and value level is not always in a one-to-one relationship. For example, Shenhe have a really good balance. However, because other crowd sub DPS also exist, then Shenhe value lower by a little bit, as she's not really necessary in order to play any of the team comp that she's in. Starting off, Yae Miko elemental skill drop a totem, or rather free totem that you can put in a triangle, and it does damage over time, similar to how you drop Os on Fischl and it does damage over time. Now the thing here is that Fischl does it purely in single target damage because it is auto targeted, while Yae Miko have a small potential of doing AoE. But to be honest, in the footage we have seen so far, it looked like the AoE is really small, so the chances of it being able to hit multiple target is also going to be really small. So to be honest, I wouldn't really call Yae Miko a AoE Fischl. Well, at least for her elemental skill. Yae Miko does have a really good elemental burst. It has a really big radius, and it probably does a really good chunk of burst damage. And to be honest, Yae Miko is more likely a elemental burst focused character than a elemental skill one, which is not exactly the right comparison between Fischl and Yae Miko, as Yae Miko is focused on doing burst damage while Fischl is doing on consistent damage. But regardless, they do have some similarity, especially with Yae Miko being a electro characters, which is mean that she's gonna be reliant on raw damage. So there is a chance that how good Yae Miko is just pretty much come down to her scaling and her motion value. You know, if she does a million damage and just one-shot the enemy, well, then she'll be really good. And if she doesn't really do enough damage to justify using her, then she may not be that good. We will have to see the actual calculation when the character drops. As always, we're not gonna talk about damage here, as there's no point where we just do the calculation when the character is actually out. With that being said, Yae Miko have a very straightforward combo where you drop 3 elemental skills, elemental burst, and then you drop 3 elemental skills again. The problem here is that it takes a lot of field time. It takes around probably 6 seconds and onward for swapping. In comparison, Fischl just spawn Os and leave the field, which is 1 or 2 seconds. So Yae Miko just takes significantly more field time in comparison to the Fischl, and in trade-off, she does a lot more burst damage in doing so. So this is the reason why you cannot actually compare Fischl and Yae Miko together, because they're just so different. Even though they're both electro sub DPS, they do it entirely differently, where Yae Miko do a lot more burst damage but take a lot more field time, and Fischl it just drop Os and leave. Now, the good thing about having your damage condensed in a short burst window, which is how Yae Miko does it, is that it's very easy to buff stacks and utilize your buff. And it's one of the reasons why characters like Ayaka and Raiden can use buff really well, because these characters dish out their damage in a short period amount of time. So you simply buff for that short period amount of time and just dish out all your damage before the buff expires. It is one of the reasons why Hyper Raiden work, because you just use all your buff in that short condensed window and then you call it a day. Likewise, Yae Miko can probably utilize buff really well, where you just simply buff her for that short period of burst window, and then you dish out all your damage before your buff expired. But in return, Yae Miko elemental burst does have a significant drawback as well, which is very high energy cost. Yae Miko elemental burst have a 90 cost, which means we are gonna need to pair her with some character that generate a lot of electro energy, and she might still have energy issues on top of that. And potentially that character shouldn't take too much field time, as Yae Miko does take about 6 to 7 second field time. And ideally, you put her in a team that also gives you some amount of buff while you do it. Honestly, at this point, if you haven't noticed that, every single aspect about Yae Miko indicate that she is meant to be paired with Raiden. I mean, it just makes sense. Even in the game, it is implied that Yae Miko and Raiden have some Sasuke relationship, similar to how Ningguang and Beidou have some Sasuke relationship. But regardless, Raiden is gonna be the perfect pairing with Yae Miko. Raiden does generate a really good amount of electro energy using her elemental skills, and on top of that, Raiden also buff elemental burst damage, which Yae Miko does a lot. It's just meant to be. Oh, and also Raiden doesn't take that much field time because her damage is condensed in a short window, which means that Yae Miko taking more field time is not a dramatic issue in the team. That being said, the most obvious team that come to mind is to put her into Hyper Raiden and replace the Bennett in this party. Now, the reason why you replace Bennett instead of Sarah is because Sarah just makes more sense to keep, as Sarah can also give you flat attack boost, which means the Bennett attack boost is not as valuable. But more importantly is that Sarah also generates electro energy, and C6 Sarah buff Yae Miko and Raiden to such a good amount. Remember that both Raiden and Yae Miko does damage in a short period burst window, which means they can fully utilize the Sarah C6 and just does a crazy amount of damage. This means a team like Raiden, C6 Sarah, Yae Miko, and finally a Anemo character is gonna be the go-to team. Either you can bring Jean for healing or you can bring Kaza for even more damage. The problem with this team is that it is quite expensive. It requires you to have a specific limited 5-star character, which is Raiden, which is not everybody have or everybody like. On top of that, you kind of want a C6 Sarah, which might be expensive to get depending on if MiHoYo decide to put Sarah on the Yae Miko banner as well. Needing another specific 5-star character is not really to my liking, in this case Raiden Shogun. And to be honest, how much of the dynamic does it really change anyway? It's not like Yae Miko is gonna break the Raiden Shogun team. You don't need Yae Miko to play any of the existing Raiden Shogun team, which means she can exist without her. You can play Raiden Shogun in Hyper Raiden, you can play Raiden Shogun in Raiden National. Both of these teams still work. You definitely do not need Yae Miko at all. This is the reason why I dropped her rating slightly. I think that overall she is gonna be balanced. You can use her if you have the cases to use her. It's just that it's really just unnecessary and it's luxury, so therefore her value is just not that high. But of course, that's not what you care about. You just care for the BOOBA, in which case she'll perform well. Something interesting to call is that if your Raiden Shogun is really strong, potentially have C2, you might actually prefer to run Hyper Raiden instead. This is because you want to buff your Raiden a lot so that you can utilize your really strong Raiden instead of splitting your damage onto another character, which in this case is Yae Miko. So if you have C6 Raiden but a C0 Yae Miko, she could actually be not worth it, as she'll actually decrease the power level of your team. But on the bright side, she does replace Bennett, which means you can free up the Bennett for your other side of the abyss, potentially running Bennett with a Xiangling to draft a national team. So now you have two really good teams. You have Raiden, Yae Miko on one side, and then you have Bennett, Xiangling on the other side, and you can potentially clear the abyss. If anything, this is probably the biggest reason to roll for Yae Miko, is that you already have Raiden and you don't have anything else. In this case, you just do this and you kind of beat the game. But what happens if you don't have Raiden Shogun? Well, the answer is just roll Raiden Shogun forehead. That's why MiHoYo is rerunning the Raiden Shogun banner. So for the people who have Yae Miko but not Raiden, they can pick up a Raiden on the way. But let's be real, if you actually don't end up getting Raiden, then the only thing you can run with Yae Miko is like nothing. You could run Beidou with Yae Miko, but there's not enough electro energy there. So that means you have to add a Fischl on top to make a triple electro team: Beidou, Yae Miko, and then Fischl. And to be honest, this is not really better than Sucrose, Fischl, Beidou. In fact, it doesn't even enable you to play a new team, it rather just devalue one of your existing team. It's not like Fischl or Beidou have buff anyway, so it's not like Yae Miko can utilize those. So while it is runnable, it's just not really worth it. Overall, Yae Miko is pretty much identical to Shenhe. You don't need her in terms of meta. She's a luxury character. She doesn't really change your account in any meaningful way, but if you have her in the right settings and in the right team, she could perform decently well. And pretty much just like Shenhe, she is quite balanced in terms of power level, but in terms of value, in my opinion, at the moment, it's a little bit lower than average, just like how Shenhe was. But to be honest, while we list out like one potential good team and like one meta team, in the past, pretty much every character end up getting some secret team discovered after a while, so who knows, potentially something could happen with Yae Miko as well. A final word, however, is that, well, I know you guys actually don't care, you're gonna roll for it regardless of the meta anyway, so why are you watching this video? BOOBA, Xiangling. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. See y'all next time.